Hey everybody, welcome back to Video. So today we're going to be doing a series, is that an analog in your pocket? Are you just happy to see me? And today we're going to be talking about the new Vectrex Core. Came out a few weeks ago, and honestly it just took me a minute to get around to making this video. Now I used to own a Vectrex back in the day, not all the way back in the 80s, I was not alive, but maybe 10 years ago I had one in my collection, and just recently, maybe 3-4 years ago, I sold it because honestly it was gigantic, it was bulky, and I never really found myself playing it all that much. But now on the Analogue Pocket with the amazing looking screen, this thing is just an absolute ton of fun and something that I'm sure 99% of you have never played in real life. Now there's not a whole lot of setup guide on this one, we're just talking about the news here, but you do need to make sure that you run Pocket Updater if you want this to come down, and again I recommend you run Pocket Updater at least like once a month to make sure all of the newest cores on the arcade side, handheld and console side all come down for you. It's just a good rule of thumb to make sure you get everything you want. Now if you go into OpenFPGA, this is going to be under console, although technically maybe I would consider it a handheld because it is a stationary unit with its own screen, but it's going to be under consoles and Vectrex. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you think it's actually a handheld. I would be curious what you guys consider things. What you'll see here is if you get into Vectrex and hit run, all of the different games you have added to the Vectrex folder are going to be there. You'll figure out how to add your own games. Really, honestly, it's not that hard. And the fun part is you can use all the overlays for the Vectrex Core. So much of what a Vectrex is not just the game and not just the vector screen, it's all the overlays that added graphics and colors where there weren't any. One of the reasons I sold my Vectrex was because about 7 of the games I had, I think I had 9 in total, did not have the overlays, and those were very hard to find. So you only get like half an experience without those overlay cards. The nice thing is here in the core you're going to have all of the overlays, and there's actually a lot of fun games to play. But the best part is, and you don't get as much of it in the actual direct capture, is that the screen really does a great job of selling the fact that it looks like a vector display. Now if you're not familiar with vector displays, they were completely different than CRT televisions and 100% completely different than LCD screens. It was a different display technology that was used in arcade games and a lot of the earliest computer monitors. And the fun part is you do have the ability to turn them on or off, and we'll go over that in just a moment. You'll see here that for the controls you're basically going to have to always look at the overlay to understand what you're doing. It's going to be button 1 through 4, and at the bottom on the overlay it's going to show you what buttons do which. The D-pad is always going to be the D-pad, you really can't reconfigure that. Something like the Fortress of Nazrod here, it has a really fun look. This does a good job, especially in games I'm going to show later, of actually selling a pseudo 3D appearance, and that's what a lot of vector graphics in arcades were used for back in the day. It was easier to sell the illusion of 3D in vector than it was in sprites, because don't forget these games came out in like 1983 to 1984. Now on display mode you're going to see under mode settings you have sharpness and frame blending. Frame blending on will sell a little bit of that vector persistence on the screen more. It'll give you a little bit more of a drag to all of those pseudo vector graphics. You can decide what you want, but as far as integer plus, I don't recommend either of those. Just leaving it as fit does the best job here. You'll see you also have overburn, which is going to be a little bit different of a look for those vector lines. It comes out better in the handheld screen than it does on captures. But let's move over to another game, Star Castle here. It's a very fun game, but you might notice that as your ship goes into the different colors, it also changes colors. When you're under the blue background, your ship is blue. When you go into the red and the yellow, the ship is going to become those colors, and all the projectiles coming out at you are going to do that as well. That is because it's simulating what the overlay would do back in the day. You can turn the overlay off and you can actually see what would be drawn to the screen on a Vectrex or on your Analogue Pocket in this instance. This is totally a valid way to play the game. If you want it to look super rudimentary simple, it is a particular vibe, but that's the fun part. Every single overlay for games is available to use on the core so long as you bring the files along with you, and it really does show what you are experiencing on screen. And that's why this is even better than a real Vectrex if you don't have the overlays, because they get lost almost all the time. And you'll see here in Web Wars, this is just going to sell the complete illusion of 3D. This feels like Tempest 2000 long before that series would ever exist, and the audio is very interesting as well. Go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back. I mean, it's really hard to call that a soundtrack. It really just is sound effects, but it's interesting to listen to, and honestly, it sounds about as good as the Vectrex is ever going to sound. But with the vector appearance here on the core, you can just see that this does really look like 3D. It's got a nice vanishing point to infinity in the middle of the screen, and that really does look like it has the appearance of having 3 dimensions of depth. That's the fun part about this core. Obviously, it was already on Mr. FPGA and it's been ported over here, but it is a fun time to check out. There's actually some really good games on the Vectrex. There's more to offer here than you would expect. Something like Spike, this is just a really charming game with a little bit of story, and it actually has some digitized speech. It's going to be very hard to understand what that speech is, but it's one of the earliest examples of any sort of speech on a home console back in the day. Because don't forget, when the Vectrex came out, Ronald Reagan was still in the White House. That is how old this hardware was, and it was super impressive when it hit the store shelves back then, I'm sure, and it still, with its look, has an impression today. It's so interesting because it's not like you're really going to see vector graphics very often anymore. I think if you go out to Galloping Ghost, the largest arcade out there, you may see 1 or 2 vector arcade cabinets on the floor, but for the most part, this is extinct technology as far as gaming is concerned, unless you're a Vectrex collector, and if you are, you're probably not watching a video on Vectrex on FPGA, you're probably just in front of your Vectrex. But don't pass this core up if you don't think you're interested in it. Give it a try, there's a lot of fun to be had. And this is one of the main reasons I love FPGA gaming, whether it's on the Mr. FPGA side or the Analogue Pocket side. It brings you so many different experiences. The odds are that you don't know anyone who owns a Vectrex, although I guess you're my channel's viewers, so maybe you do know somebody who does. But this is the type of thing, it's preservation, it's fun, it's all of those things at once. And I will say, even on the capture, the charm of vector graphics comes across really well. But something like the next game, Pole Position here, just looks so much better on the Pocket screen. The browns, the blacks, the greens fading up into blues just pop because the Pocket has one of the best portable screens on any device ever made, in my opinion. Analogue rivals Apple with their screen technology wherever they're sourcing them from. So definitely, if you don't play your Pocket on the go, just pop it out of the dock and take a look at the pseudo vector graphics on the screen. I think you're going to be very, very impressed. And again, this is just one of those things. It's so much fun to play and experience. There are some good games on this system, and there's some games that actually have more than just a little 10-minute gaming hook. There's some games that might have 45 minutes to an hour of gameplay in there, and they are going to challenge you, and they're going to be a breath of fresh air. There's so many modern games to play, so many retro games from the 90s, but popping back into the early 80s and seeing the Vectrex in motion on the Pocket is just a lot of fun, and there's something here for basically everyone. Armor Attack, a very simple game, and I remember something very similar being in my local mall when I was growing up. I almost wonder if Vectrex sold some of this technology, those little amusements where you sat in them as a kid, popped a quarter in and could play a game like this. If you remember what those were, leave me a comment down below. It's a memory I have, but I've never been able to find any evidence online of who actually manufactured those things. But that is totally an aside. If you haven't played Vectrex ever before in your life, it's now here on the Analogue Pocket, and that is just awesome. The best part is, unlike real hardware, you're not out there hunting for the overlays. You can just download the files and add them to the Pocket yourself, which is a hell of a lot better than going on eBay and hoping that someone's selling the one you need for the game that you just recently picked up, and zero complaints about that. But yeah, that's Vectrex on the Analogue Pocket, and like I said, it just looks so crystal clear and clean and charming on the screen. This is one of those instances where I recommend start with the handheld version and only dock it if you feel like sitting in front of your couch. Leave me a comment down below and tell me, did you have a Vectrex back in the day? Were you alive during its actual production run? Because I have a sense of how old you are, but honestly, it's just a range. But yeah, go play some Vectrex, have a good time, and put that analog back in your pocket, because I am done and I am leaving. Bye-bye.